Hello, Manchester. I'm Connie Van Houten. I will be your host for the next hour, so welcome to Ward 13. Some of you know me better perhaps from radio. I'm a former school board representative, and as such, I hosted the What's Cool in Manchester Schools radio program. But John Hopwood, and I wish to give him a shout-out, has generously given us some time for his TV show, from his TV show at this time. And so I'm using the time today to bring some very special people to the table. There is, as you know, a primary coming up and an election following soon thereafter. I'm a Westside person. I'm running on the West Side, and I've brought three of the Westside representative candidates to the table to talk to you tonight. And I've also brought in a co-host that promises to be very helpful to me in helping to get this conversation going. So let me begin by introducing my co-host and letting us tell a bit about himself. My co-host today is Steve Shurtleff, the minority leader, is that the correct way to say it?
There's so many titles.
Democratic
That's one
minority
of them.
leader.
Yeah.
Actually, a man that I hope to see be the Speaker of the House in the next session, assuming that the votes go correctly and that office is available to him. Anyway, Steve, tell us about yourself, please.
Well, being my age, this could take a while, but I'll try to do it briefly. First of all, thank you for inviting me down here to Manchester. It's so nice to be here with all of you and with Tim and Ken and Willis as well. I was born and raised in Concord, graduated from Bishop Brady High School. Back then, the draft was still in effect, and I knew I wasn't going on to college, so I enlisted in the Army. Spent 3 years as a military policeman. 1 year of that was in Vietnam. And when I got out of the service, I joined the Concord Police Department. That was in '69, and then '74, I was hired by the United States Marshal Service. Spent 3 years at my first duty station, Cleveland, Ohio. Was able to transfer back to the Marshal's office in New Hampshire, retired in the year 2000 as a supervisory deputy. In 2004, I decided to run for the New Hampshire House. I was a substitute school teacher for 4 years, and I enjoyed it, but I want to introduce a bill that would provide free education in New Hampshire for children of members of the armed forces from the Granite State who died while serving our country. And I talked to my local representative about the bill, and he didn't seem that interested, so that made me decide to run. And so I defeated the incumbent Republican and introduced that bill, and it was passed and signed into law. And now it's been 14 years, and I'm still in the House. And in 2007, I was elected to the Concord City Council as an at-large council member, and I'm now in my 11th year as a city councilor. And in the House, I've been very fortunate to chair the Criminal Justice Committee, and for the past 6 years been Democratic leader. And it really has been a labor of love.
And it's been a labor of love to have you serving with us. This is the end of my first term, but I must say that it's been made far easier by the leadership that you and others have provided, for sure.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, I probably should say that every guest on the show today is an active candidate. We all run for office every 2 years. I am a candidate in District 45, which is wards 10, 11, and 12 on the west side. Your actual district is what, Steve?
It's Ward, Merrimack District 11. It's Ward 1 of Concord, the village of Pennacook.
And do you have a primary?
No, I don't,
Okay.
but I have an opponent in the general election.
Okay, and I think, well, all of us hopefully will get through to the general. There are a couple of us that have primaries. I am one that has a primary. Let me just briefly give the names of my guests, and then I'll give Steve the chance to take off with the
Sure.
first question. All from the West Side and all running for state representative. Tim Smith from Ward 10. Willis Griffith from Ward 11, Willis is over here, and Ken Snow from Ward 12. Each of them has a partner, if you will, that they're running with, and next week I'll feature their partners as well. But right now, let's find out a little bit about you gentlemen, please. Steve?
Well, let's start with Tim. And I look at Tim now, his service in the House, and I think of him as being the conscience of the House. And I say that with a great deal of respect. And I'm so glad you're running again. I'm glad you're here with us tonight. Tim, the question is the one we hear a lot. What made you decide to run for the House and run for re-election?
So it's an interesting question. You know, my life story would take a couple of hours. It's been a rough ride. The 30-second version, you know, some people say that they came from nothing. I literally came from nothing. I grew up homeless for a few periods, extreme poverty all over the East Coast. Eventually, after I got out of high school, you know, did some college, found my way to Manchester, settled here in the early 2000s, and have been here on the West Side ever since, and loved every minute of it. I come from a political activist background, and after the financial crash happened, I wasn't too happy about the way that the government handled and responded to that, so I decided to get involved, and I ran for office, and I defeated a 30-year incumbent and the local chair of the opposition party, which, went pretty well, and I'm now finishing up my third term running for a fourth. In the legislature, most of the issues that I personally focus on are, as Steve alluded, a lot of the sort of background ethics and procedural issues that aren't really, they're not sexy issues. They don't get covered in the press. But someone has to complain about corruption, and it usually falls to me because I'm good at complaining.
And I have to echo what Steve said introducing you. I remember especially one particular issue that you were instrumental in bringing some focus to what's going on in the House, and I want to thank you for being here. Steve, you're up.
Well, it's nice to have Ken, and I hear from Democrats and Republicans on the Health and Human Services Committee that Ken served on with his expertise in state government. It would be so good to have him back in Concord. So, Ken, the same question that I asked him, what made you decide to run for the New Hampshire House?
Well, I don't I don't think there's any single reason. I've been a resident of New Hampshire for over 50 years at this point. For 48 of those years, I was a social worker, administrator, and advocate within the community mental health system in New Hampshire. I had numerous opportunities to come up to Concord and advocate for the people that we served, and frankly loved every minute of doing that. And then when I retired in 2014, I said to myself, gee, wouldn't it be interesting to sit on the other side of the decision-making table for a change? And maybe I could bring some information to the other people that are working on that other side that would be useful to them. So I ran, and fortunately for me, I got elected, and I got reelected. And then at the end of last year, I had to move to a new ward. So I left my old ward, my old home in Ward 2, and moved over to Ward 12. So in a sense, I'm kind of a newbie, but really running for my third term. But I'm coming from a brand new ward with brand new constituents around me who I'm trying to meet and deal with at this point. And I hope that I get an opportunity to serve them again. And I hope I get back on the Health, Human Services, and Elder Affairs Committee, because I've really felt that that was a well-oiled machine in terms of working on things.
And Ward 12 is the ward that you've joined us in, which is my home ward where I've run for school board from. And we've got some great people there. I think
Yes,
they're
you
going to
do.
be very interested in the kinds of things you have to offer.
Yeah.
Steve, you're up again.
Well, gee, Willis, it's so good you're running, and you've got a great background, especially your education, and you could bring so much to the New Hampshire House, and it's so good to see young people running. I think the average age of House members is like 66.
I'm
And
62. But
oh, okay.
that's
Well, I know
okay.
I'm above
Go
it.
ahead.
That's all I know. I'm on the wrong side of that number. But it's so good that you're running. And what made you decide to run for the House, besides the money?
Besides the money, that's what I say to everybody. $100 a year is
Yeah.
the best selling point you can have. But in addition to that, I went away to school for 4 years. I ended up graduating from Northwestern. But the entire time I was gone, I was looking back at my family, dealing with health issues, looking at financial hardships. My sister suffered a very bad concussion, was out of high school for over 2 years. My family had filed for bankruptcy. So these things just kept tugging at me, and I felt like there was nothing I could do because I was so far away from home, first in Philadelphia, then in Chicago. And just being that far away was a real strain. But last year I had an opportunity to come back to New Hampshire and go to UNH for my Master of Public Policy, which is a great opportunity to continue playing soccer, which is a game I love, and to be close to my family, which was so important to me. And the final straw for me to get involved was going down to DC in January, and coming back, we'll go as stoked up and a little frustrated.
Yeah.
And I saw this, running for the State House and state issues, as the best way to make an impact right away.
That's great.
Yeah, Willis is a bright light on the west side. He and I have been I actually run in 10, 11, and 12. Each of these gentlemen runs in an individual ward, but I'm in the floterial. When I walk in Ward 11, I walk with Willis. And if you see him stand, he's a good foot taller than I am. He's got these long legs. He's a soccer star. And there's nothing like energizing me as we trudge around Ward 11 together, and I welcome him to our group. I want to mention very quickly before we go to our next couple of questions, each of you basically has another person who's running with you, and we want to make sure that those names are out there as well. In my case, in the floterial, someone not with us today is Jane Bolio. She's been a long time representative in the House, a very good lady. She and I are quite compatible, and we work together very well. You are with Tim?
I'm running with Heidi Hamer, who's a local Democrat, and she's been a good, loyal trooper for a number of years, and I hope she's going to join us in Concord.
And she will be on the show next week. Ken?
I'm running with a gentleman that's well established in the House named Bob Backus, an attorney and an expert on utilities, science, and things that I'm not very well versed in. And I go to him for information to understand bills that come up in that area. And I hope that he and anyone else can come to me with things that I know something about. And that's what's so compatible about it. But Bob is a great guy that ought to be back up there because he provides some very good insight and helping people understand extremely complicated issues that don't make sense until he explains it to you.
And that's the beauty of the House. It is a citizens' legislature, which is one question that's coming up in a moment, but we all come from different walks of life. We all bring different skills and experiences to the table, and therefore we can all work together in a different way. And Bob will be a guest on this show next week as well. And Willis?
I'm running with Patty Cornell. Patty's running for her third term, I believe, in office. She's a Westsider through and through. I think we have a great balance. She brings a lot of experience and wisdom. And I'm bringing some youth and energy to the table, and I think together we're the best team for Ward 11.
And I think if you look at just what's been said here, we've really got a collection of individuals with great heart, great spirit, and great intelligence, and a great chance to go up to the legislature and bring some West Side kick-butt attitude, if you may. I think what I'd like to do is just kind of throw out a general question at this point, and anybody who wants to chime in, please feel free to do so. It is well known that our state legislature is, shall we say, large, 400 strong. And as Willis alluded, at $100 per year, we truly are a citizens' legislature.
Yeah.
Nobody makes a profession or a career or creates a family income up there. What do you guys think about that? Anybody who wants to get in, including Steve,
Sure.
what do you think about this whole idea of having a citizens' legislature in our state, a small state with many, many people running and taking seats in the Great Hall?
I think that every single person in the legislature has to be incredibly passionate and driven for public service and to do the best by their communities. I can attest firsthand that there are sacrifices required to run. You are up there, maybe not 5 days a week, maybe not 3 days a week, but most of us have to work a day job and put ourselves in a position to be able to do that. And so for the people willing to make that sacrifice and willing to make it work, there's a reason they're willing to do so. And everyone that serves, everyone that tries to serve, I believe, has the best of intentions.
Yeah, I think 400 seems like a very large number.
It
How
does.
Can you ever get, how
It
can you ever
does.
get any common sense to all of it? But you know, when you look around the country and when you look at Washington, D.C., who have smaller and kind of professional legislatures, who seemingly can't get out of their own way many times. And yet here we are, this 400 group of laymen that get together, and we seem to really effectively reflect what the minds of the people that voted for us are. And we're really a well-oiled machine compared to those other legislatures, I think. And in my experience in it, I'm always impressed. You don't always get what you want, but there's a good reason for that. And we all have an opportunity to voice our opinion and have it weigh in with everybody else. But in the end, we do a pretty good job of reflecting what the people that voted to put us there want.
Well, I think, the whole idea of the 400-person volunteer legislature, it's a mixed bag. There are pros and cons, I think, to the model. One of the biggest advantages, I think, is that it's accessible, not only to us as candidates, is that it's very easy to run for the House of Representatives in New Hampshire. You don't have to, sell out and raise $50,000 or, any of this weird stuff. But it also makes us more accessible to our constituents. It is so easy for someone to get in touch with one of us. All of our home phone numbers are listed on the State House website. Just 2 months ago, I got a call from a constituent who needed help resolving a benefit issue with the HHS department up in Concord. And, it was a trivial thing for me to be able to resolve for them just by having contacts in the state government and knowing who to call for something like this. But this constituent had struggled with it for 6 months before finally, giving their state rep a call. In a larger state like Wyoming or something, or California, where a state senator represents more people than a congressman, you don't have that kind of access that people have here in New Hampshire. But the downside to that, I think, is that as Steve has seen more than I have. It's easier for some of the weirdos to get elected, and people see in the news every term we have some people, usually in the other party, they're in the news for various felony arrests, and unfortunately those people sneak in a little bit easier than they would in a state with a smaller legislature of more heavily vetted candidates. But we have the ups and the downs with it.
Well, just a little bit of history. We're the third largest English-speaking legislative body in the world after the U.S. Congress and after the British Parliament and the U.S. Congress. And up until 1889, legislators used to get per diem. And then in 1889, instead of recessing when they were supposed to, they stayed in session just so they could collect more money. So the citizens were outraged and said, "You've got to set a salary for yourself, no more per diem." So a committee met, and they realized that the average farmer in New Hampshire made $200 a year. And so they said, well, we're part-time, we should get half of that, $100 a year. And then they said, let's put it in the New Hampshire Constitution so they can never take it away from us. And that's the way it's been ever since. And often I'll speak to fourth graders touring the State House, and I'll ask them, how many of you get $2 a week in allowance? And everybody's hand goes up, and I always tell them, keep up the good work. You're doing better than I am, so that's wonderful. But, like Tim mentioned, helping a constituent, there are days you leave the State House and you say to yourself, why am I doing this? And then you think back to somebody who helped with a problem, who just couldn't get through the bureaucracy of state government. You say, that's why I'm doing this. It makes it all worthwhile.
Yep.
Right, and he mentioned that we're all a phone call away. In actuality, with the numbers of us that we have, many of us are neighbors. It's easy enough to walk
Exactly.
out your door and say, that's my state rep. So there are a lot of things going well for it, and I do agree with you, Tim. There are some issues as well. Before I forget, and hopefully I'm going to be happy that I just did this. Willis has a joke to share with us, and I'm going to give him the time to give his joke to the rest of the
boy.
world. Willis, your joke, please.
Oh, we're on the spot here.
You're on the spot. You said you had the joke, and
We
here
have
we go.
the joke prepared and ready to go.
Yes.
All right, so there's a family of tomatoes. There's a mama tomato, a papa tomato, and a baby tomato. They're a lovely little tomato family. And so they decide to go out for a Sunday stroll, more like a roll, this family of tomatoes. So they're just rolling around town, one after another. But obviously, the mama tomato and the papa tomato are much bigger than the little baby tomato. So they're rolling much faster. They can go much faster. So the baby tomato starts to fall behind. And the park's just across the street. So the mama tomato and the papa tomato are starting to roll across the street with the baby tomato way far behind. So the mama tomato turns around, and just as the baby tomato is crossing the street, yells, "Catch up!"
Can I quote Jeb Bush? Please laugh.
No, that's
Thanks for
was
that,
cute.
Connie.
that
Yeah.
is
Oh,
cute.
my
Yeah, not overly political, but that's okay. We don't,
That's
We
good.
don't have
Yeah,
to
we'll
stick-
take it. We'll
yeah.
take it.
And I
good,
think that
clean
kind of
family.
highlights another aspect of being in the House. As I said, it's only been my first term, so maybe I've not seen the whole spectrum of things, but there's a camaraderie and a collegiality among us who have similar values and similar philosophies, but I think across the aisle as well.
Yeah.
I have made friends with people who are diametrically opposed to some of my ideas, and yet we can be we can be good at share tomato jokes. If
Thanks for that.
anytime, Willis. Does anyone else have a joke to share, or shall we go on with the show?
Save yourself.
No, I'm
Say
Please
no.
go on.
Yeah, I'm going to
Willis,
bail out on that one.
say no, say no,
Nobody
say no.
can top that one.
We're going to throw out another question here too. If Steve, if you want to go out, this is kind of a two-faceted question.
Um,
What is it? I'll ask the question.
Okay, it's yeah. Well, so
He's having trouble with my handwriting.
yeah.
She's a teacher.
And it's good though. It's very good. The question as I read it, and when I'm not putting my glasses on either, which makes it a handicap. So great about Manchester and New Hampshire, and what do you look at? And we'll start with Willis this time, to be fair. What do you look at as the greatest needs for the city of Manchester and also for the state of New Hampshire?
I
A
think
bunch
one-
of questions there, so
bunch of
separate them
questions.
any
Yeah.
you want to. Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the greatest things about Manchester is that we have all of these pockets of community, and they're so tight, and you'll see different ones popping up all over. So I think the West Side has a very strong community, and there's a bunch of smaller ones within that. We have up, down, left, right. Everywhere there's people willing to support each other, and I think that that's one of the strengths of Manchester. I think one thing that Manchester could use their strengths to improve some of their weaknesses is taking advantage of those communities to address some issues. So one of the things that I'm running on is grassroots solutions to a lot of issues that I believe are trying to be solved from top-down approaches. It's not just throwing money and hoping something sticks, it's having community-informed policies. So you're listening to what your neighbors have to say, you're bringing it up to Concord, and it's not just staying in Concord, it's making its way back down to the communities, and it's being implemented by the very people that gave you the suggestions in the first place. I think that that would make a huge difference for Manchester and New Hampshire. That being said, I think New Hampshire is the greatest state in the Union. I have so much New Hampshire pride. I love that we have the mountains, the lakes, the cities. We have everything that you could ask for in a state, and it's just a great place. As I said, community everywhere, great education. What more do you want in a state?
Okay.
Great.
I started my professional career in Boston, and I thought that has to be the place to be. And after 2 years, I realized that I was a small fish in a very big pond. So I decided to come up to a small pond, become a big fish, and hopefully go back to the big pond someday. Well, I wasn't here very long before all of a sudden that big pond lost its appeal. And I realized that the real big pond was right here. And I fell in love with the city of Manchester. I just loved it here. I've raised 2 children. They were educated in the public schools in Manchester. Both are doing extremely well. And there's a lot of aspects to Manchester that lend, not just to me, but to other people who live here, an awful lot of services and help that really help people move on through their life and really enjoy life, which is what we're all hoping to do eventually. I guess one of the things that, from my personal experience, as I said, I worked in community mental health here in Manchester for 48 years, actually. And the thing is, Manchester enabled the Community Mental Health Center here in Manchester to really be a leader, one of the top centers in the state. We're often creating brand new programs that are sort of leading the way. We're in the midst of a mental health crisis right now, and some of the more innovative programs between Concord and Manchester have really sort of led the way, and others are copying us. But that didn't happen just because of guys like me that work there. It happened because it happened in a community where we had tremendous, tremendous support from just ordinary people that kept forward, and for political leaders that listened to what we thought we needed and went with us. So I just think, big pond, never mind. I'm staying right where I am.
And all of these connections, of course, are what we take to Concord
Yeah.
when we go to Concord, when we try to bring back from Concord those policies and procedures that will benefit our community and our constituents as well. Do you want to weigh in on this one, Tim?
Yeah, when I first moved to Manchester, I moved here for work, to be closer to my job. And then after a couple of years, when I moved on to another job that wasn't so close, I loved Manchester so much, I decided to stay rather than, move closer to where I was working. And even still to this day, I have a half hour or sometimes a little longer than a half hour commute into work each day. And I stay in Manchester because I love the community. I'm close to everything I want to be close to. All of my neighbors and everything on the west side, great people. And in terms of what I think Manchester needs out of the state legislature, it is the restoration of support that has been cut from the state government and additional support that we don't get. As a concrete example, Steve, you'll remember, I think it was in the 2015, we had that bill to repeal the highway funding from the gas tax.
Right.
Exit 4 is in my district in Ward 10. If that bill had passed, the road crews that were halfway through building Exit 4 would have just packed up and gone home at the end of the month. And knowing that I could be part of the solution in stopping those cuts and making sure that, a seriously big public works project that impacts everyone in the district, everyone uses Exit 4, to make sure that that funding could be protected, I felt really good about working on that issue. And going back a couple of years further to the Bill O'Brien years, the cuts in the 2011 session budget, we lost all the support we were getting from the state of New Hampshire for all the municipal pensions. And that translates into property taxes. And I was renting at the time. I bought a condo last year, but my rent went up when those cuts happened because my landlord's property taxes went up by a lot. And it doesn't take much for us to fulfill our obligations in Concord and fulfill the promises that have been made to the city of Manchester and communities around the state. And by fulfilling those promises, we can save people a lot of headaches. And it feels really good to be part of doing that.
And if I can just kind of chime in a little bit from my perspective, which is different than yours, as most of you know, my pathway has been through education. And I'm born and bred. I was born on the West Side. I graduated from West High School. I am a homeowner in the West Side now. But I still look at our schools, and I believe very strongly in our schools and very strongly in our kids. But we have challenges. And those challenges need to be addressed locally and from the state as well. And I'm not factoring out the federal level either. But I don't want to say it takes a village. That's way too cliche. But every kid belongs to every one of us. And I believe there are some things in Concord that are very important. We had that voucher bill, which went through, I think, 4 votes.
5 votes.
5 votes.
Yeah, to finally defeat it.
And it would have been devastating to Manchester. We have many of our youngsters are on free and reduced lunch, and that means that they are at or near the poverty level. Many of our youngsters are learning English as a second language. They're ready to fly. Our schools are ready to fly. We have a great deal going on. And some of the funding, too. We had retirement funding that was picked up at the state level at one point, and I think it came to a tie vote to restore some of that funding, and I believe it was broken by the Speaker of the House, which is why
Exactly.
I hope the next Speaker of the House is sitting next to me right now. That would be a marvelous thing.
Well, Tim mentioned the downshifting, and that voucher bill was a prime example. Between 95 million and 235 million over the next 5 years would have been downshifted to local property taxpayers to subsidize private and parochial and homeschooling, and at the expense of public schools.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we can all come up with our own stories here, but you can hear the different perspectives that we each come from.
Absolutely.
Now, Steve, you're not a Manchester man. Do you want in on that question? Do you want to talk about
The greatness of Concord?
Yeah, or the greatness of Manchester.
Well,
Hey, gotta keep it local.
Queen City, that's right.
It is
Yeah,
a
go
Queen
with it
City.
wherever you like. That's fine.
Well, I've got some ties. I belong to the Ancient Order Hibernians here in Manchester, so it really is. And over the years, Manchester has really there's been a renaissance in the Queen City. I can remember 30 or 40 years ago, it didn't have the vibrancy that it has now. Just walking into the studio here, the people sitting on the sidewalks and having meals and talking, and it's such a warm and welcoming city. And as is mentioned, it really is a city of neighborhoods. It's in Manchester. It's mostly what parish are you from? Are you from up on the Heights, Rock Rimmon, or wherever your neighborhood is? And there's it's a city of neighborhoods, but the synergy of all those communities coming together makes it such a wonderful city.
I absolutely agree with that. I'm half French and half Greek, and so the French-Canadian West Side was very enveloping and a great place for me. But then I'd cross over to the East Side, where my Greek family had tomatoes in their gardens and made spanakopita and all sorts of things, baklava. And it was, for me, it was a very great way to grow up. And I want to see more of that for our kids. I want to see that sense of belonging, that sense of this is my community. And I think we need to empower a lot of that kind of thing to happen from Concord on down. There are things you can do locally, and I don't dismiss them at all. But I think from the other end, now, I'm not sure if everybody got in on that last part of the question to talk about our greatest need in Manchester or in New Hampshire. Anybody want to get in on that before I move along?
Well, I think one thing, to remind people of is that New Hampshire's not a home rule state. We have a sort of reverse federalism here in New Hampshire, where municipalities need to be empowered to do really anything by the state legislature. The city of Manchester wouldn't be able to have a fire department if there hadn't been legislation, 120 years ago in Concord allowing cities to establish fire department. So, a lot of challenges, unfortunately, depending on who you ask, fall on us at the State House to resolve because the cities and towns are not empowered to take action on those issues. So I think that, as state legislators, we have obviously a responsibility at the state level, but we also bear some responsibility from City Hall, from the Town Hall, to carry those local issues forward into the state legislature, because in a lot of cases, we're the only ones who can.
I think that's very well said, and I'm going to turn to Steve for a moment here. Do you recall roughly how many bills we had this last session?
Over 1,000 the first half of the biennium, and close to 1,000 for the second half. I think it was like 900 and something.
And so how do we as legislators muddle through all of those issues. Can you just tell a little bit about the committee process that we'll all be going through should we be seated?
Well, that's the work of the House, is really in the committees. And I think that's where the work should be done, and it's the committees making a decision. We've seen a few times this year where the Speaker has involved himself in legislation, and the will of the committee has been somewhat thwarted by intervention and by a higher leadership in the legislature on the Republican side. But it's in the committees where the work gets done, and the House is unique. We really spend the time on the bills to make sure they're all vetted. Anybody who wants to come in and speak on a bill is heard. There's no such thing as sticking a bill in a drawer as in the U.S. Congress and not even bringing it to the floor.
Right.
And that happened under Speaker Roberts. Before that time, they could keep a bill from coming up for a vote, but every bill that is introduced must have a vote on the floor. And I think that's a very positive thing in the New Hampshire legislature.
Absolutely.
I spent my time on the Commerce Committee, and I think we probably had more bills than,
You had the most bills of any committee this year.
and there were business and insurance
Oh.
and liquor, and just a great learning curve
Oh,
for me in some
absolutely.
ways, for sure, because as you know, my background is as an English teacher, not business teacher. But yeah, you're right, and I think this is something that we all look forward to, because it is a learning process for us. But then the committees vet things out, and we look at what the committee's work has given us before we actually go to our votes. And again, just to follow up on that, could you give us a little recap of what went on in the legislature this year so that we can then segue to what we hope to have happen in the future?
I think we spent a lot of time saying no to a lot of things, and sometimes it's not the bills we pass, it's the bills we stop from coming into existence. I got to say that I was somewhat disappointed with the governor that the very first bill that he championed was concealed carry law. And he pushed that through the House and through the Senate and made sure that was his first piece of legislation. And it made me sad. I'm a gun owner. I've had a hunting license in New Hampshire, so I'm not anti-gun. I'm pro-Second Amendment, but I'm pro-gun safety. And I couldn't believe that the governor would make that his primary piece of legislation when we have so many crises, most importantly the opioid crisis. This is what we got to be focused on, and the impact on young children. But as far as the legislature itself, we've done a lot of things. We defeated right to work. We killed the voucher bill, and I got to commend the 19 Republicans that joined with
Yes.
us
Yep.
Yes.
and voted against that bill.
It was
They
actually
voted-
courageous, politically
It
courageous.
really was,
Yeah.
because they're now all being primaried
Right.
and being punished for doing the right thing. The House Democratic Caucus stayed united. We don't always agree, but when it comes to the bills that are most important to the people of New Hampshire, we stay united, we stay strong, and we do the right thing. And it's good when those Republicans will join with us and we can defeat bad legislation.
And now, as we look forward to the next session, and hopefully look forward to all of us sitting together and maybe going to lunch and listening to more of Willis's jokes. No, Willis, please save some jokes for us. That would be really good. I think it's important that we start to think about what we have lost that we need to regain.
Right.
What never did make it to the forefront to be championed by us, and the roles that we will play individually. And so I'm going to ask each of our gentlemen specifically, and take whatever time you need. I think, yes, we have plenty of time, to talk about the issues and concerns that you have going forward, whether they actually be from your background or from what did not go through in
Right.
this particular legislative session, or it's just something that comes from your constituent service or who you are. I think we'll probably start with Tim, because the last question started with Willis when we really did devote that. Tim, would you go, please?
Yeah, so when I started off in my first term, I was on the State Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs Committee, and that worked out relatively well for me for 2 terms. Some of my subject matter expertise is in constitutional nuance and things directly related to state-federal relations. But towards the end of my second term, I noticed that most of the bills that I submitted were getting sent to the Legislative Administration Committee. So this term, I found my way onto the Legislative Administration Committee and had no idea what I was in for. We ended up handling some really interesting issues that were not really related to legislation. But my service on the committee, I think, has been very productive. So that's where I'm going to hope to stay next term, presuming the people of Manchester send me back. And yeah, I've got a significant number of bills that I want to introduce, but I'm one of the representatives who runs into the problem where I come up with more ideas than I can formulate a decent bill with workable legislative language around, and I come up with more workable bills than I have the time to advocate for myself. If I had unlimited time, I'd probably introduce 30 bills a year. But, as things stand, there are plenty of people to share the load. So, as I alluded to at the beginning, most of the bills I'm going to be introducing are process issues dealing with legislative ethics, reducing the influence of lobbyists, making the legislature more transparent to constituents, who want to find out what we're up to or show up to a committee hearing and participate themselves.
And just to throw in something that is probably a little unusual this year, the Westside Democrats are working together. We've gotten together, we've talked, we've found ways to champion each other and to talk about causes. And so I think maybe there's the opportunity for some of us to share that load with you, Tim, because many of us have similar concerns and look at, many things that we want to do. So I think maybe this kind of, I don't want to call it a coalition, but it's just a partnership, a unification of the West Side to move forward on some issues. We may be able to step up and...
Well, I'll offer this as I close the thought on this. One of my main motivations, I'm not going to be a state rep forever. None of us are. I want to make sure that I've had some positive impact on the institution itself when I'm finally done with being a state rep, whether the voters send me on vacation or whether I decide to retire from it. And, that's one of the reasons that I push for some of the ethics reform and the lobbying reform and everything else. I want to make sure that the institution itself is in a better place than when I got there, because anyone who's been up there for more than 5 minutes will identify, structural flaws that maybe could be a little better. I'm one of the few people who actually tries to proactively tackle those issues rather than circumvent them.
Perfect, and I'm glad that you're there with us, or at least hopeful that you'll be there in the future as well. Ken?
Well, I served on Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs Committee, and I think so a lot of the big concerns that I had, things that I was involved in, revolved around that committee. And I should add, that committee was very refreshing to be on because it truly is a very bipartisan group. When you're sitting in there, you don't know who the Republicans and the Democrats are. You have differing opinions, but they don't fall along party lines. And in most of the bills that we come out on, we have a pretty heavy majority one way or the other. However we're going to go, there's a good deal of agreement. So to me, that was very refreshing. I think the biggest concerns that I see coming along is, and one of the bills that I sponsored was 3 areas, particularly in the area of mental health, and I asked for a commission to look at 3 areas. One is the 50 to 70 people that are sitting in hospital emergency rooms being warehoused because we just don't have the resources to take care of them, and these are dangerous people to themselves or others, and that's just sad. Secondly, we closed the Philbrook Center and moved the children into a ward on the adult unit, and that needs to change. It's a prescription for problems in the future. And then finally, the secure psychiatric unit has been a subject of considerable concern for some time because it happens to be located up at the state prison with some intermingling of the two. And I think we did make some progress in those areas. I serve on a couple of those commissions right now. My bill came into a commission. We're working on a report to be submitted in those 3 areas. Another legislator submitted a request to develop a new 10-year plan for mental health. There was a previous plan that was founded in 2008, and now in 2018 we discovered that rather than achieve those goals, we've fallen behind in almost all of them over the last 10 years. But I have been working with some consultants came in to work with that commission, and they're coming up with a report that's coming out this fall. And I think it's going to be a plan that hopefully is doable and will lead to some of the corrections for the very things that I looked at when I went. I think very closely related to the crisis that's going on in mental health, and you can't really separate them, is the substance abuse issue that's come up.
Yeah.
We've had some progress that's come along with a new federal grant that's come along that's enabled some new steps to be taken to try to deal with both the prevention, recognition, and treatment of that problem. And fortunately, as I said before, Manchester is one of the areas that's going to be spearheading that effort, along with, I think the other one is Concord, and I forget the third one. I can't remember where it is. But in any case, There are some things going on in that area. And the last thing that I'm really very concerned about is the rating that our Child Protective Services received from the federal government
Yes.
the other day.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have children that are at risk. The very fact that unless a child gets hurt, the Division of Children and Youth cannot intervene. Merely because you realize there are problems going on until that child actually gets hurt, they aren't able to go in. I think we need to make some changes. We've made some. We've appointed a child advocate. I'm dying to see what kind of impact it's going to have. We have a new director of the Division of Children and Youth, and I think he's bringing in some new ideas. But we've got to do something about it because I just read in the paper the other day, somebody injured his child
Right.
by throwing him across
Yeah.
the room, throwing him on a bed and banging him off a table, holding him by the ankle. That should not have happened. There must have been hints that was not a healthy situation, and we should have had the power to go in to intervene before that child was so badly injured. And so, I'm sorry to sound so negative.
No.
But not only do these problems exist and grow, but when they come to the fore, New Hampshire is currently making real attempts to try to resolve them. And I'm just personally delighted to be part of that, I hope constructively. And I invite everybody else to stay tuned, keep watching what you're doing, talk to your legislator. I'm interested in what he had to say about, the government in this state is pretty close. You can't go to the supermarket without people coming up and saying, I need to talk to you. It just happened to me this afternoon, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
And, if first thing they say is, we can't pay all these property taxes, and we like the no sales tax, no income tax. Now, you got to do something about those roads and bridges. You need to do something to fix the mental health system. And I think, so everybody's sort of saying below their breath,
Yeah.
we need a new source of revenue. And we need to find a way to fund all these services that are needed. And yes, I don't have any great desire to pay more taxes. I don't think any of us do. But we need to really put our heads together and figure out some way to do it. Some things have come up. We lost the advantage of a casino, if you don't consider it an advantage. But we need to come up with something. And it clearly isn't going to please anybody, but what people are going to be just as unpleased about is if we don't find the means to follow up on the progress we made in those problems that I just identified. And to do that, it's going to require revenue, and property taxes is not the way to do that. So, sorry, but am I on a soapbox? I'm sorry to do
No,
that.
you're
was
fine.
I'm just going to add to what Ken said about mental illness. And as someone who grew up in Concord, I remember when what is now the U Gallen State Office Park was the New Hampshire Hospital, and each one of those buildings was filled with somebody with some form of mental health problem. And then I think it was 81, Ken, that we deinstitutionalized and provided counseling and halfway homes. And then slowly New Hampshire stopped funding those programs. And now I've been told by corrections that over 50% of the men, and the number is higher for the women, incarcerated in New Hampshire have been diagnosed with some form of mental health issue before their arrest. And all we have done is traded institutionalization, which was wrong, at a mental health facility for incarceration in our state prisons. And we've got to, it's penny wise and pound foolish. We should be providing the help they need in the communities for far less money and keep them out of jail and out of prisons. Because all they're doing is committing an offense, coming back out again, self-medicating on street drugs and alcohol, getting in trouble, and then the cycle begins all over, and we got to break that cycle.
So, Steve, that sounds like it'll be one of the issues of your concern going forward.
Absolutely.
Are there others that you want to mention? And I do have Willis waiting to answer as well, so.
One of the things I've asked Legislative Services to look into and is dealing with children. And the Union Leader had a wonderful article a week ago about the number of children that have been, 5 children that have died because.
Let me check on that.
Well, it's true. But,
Excuse me.
Because of the parent had been either using drugs or making formula, making meth, and the child has died. And talking about parents that leave a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old alone at home as they're going out to buy drugs. And I'm looking to see if we should maybe enhance the penalties for a child endangerment. That's one thing I want to look at. One of the other things I want to see done is finally pass the rail bill.
Yes.
We can't keep widening 93 South. We've got to look to alternative means of transportation, and that's something else I'd like to see us do.
And clearly, there are a lot of really good issues. And just one point to bring up is that regardless of which committee any of us sits on, we are still free to bring bills on any topic to the forefront, to go in and testify at other committees and to listen to what's going on there. Louis, you've not yet been up at the State House with us, although you've actually come up to watch a great many of our sessions. And so I think your perspective might be a little bit different than ours, and I think probably a fresh perspective as well. What do you think about the issues and concerns ahead for us next year, and what are your interests in them?
I'd just like to reiterate the necessity of having mental health professionals in our schools. I think that it's such an important conversation, and we had some money allocated in the local Manchester budget, not enough, but that's definitely something that we'll all be fighting for at the State House. I know that is more mental health services in schools. And then transitioning from Steve's point on rail is very important. And the reason it's important is because New Hampshire fails to retain and attract young people. I have friends, family members, leaving the state and not coming back, whether it's for college, a better job, better housing opportunities. And these difficulties with young people are reflected in the State House. You go up and you see a smoking room in the legislative office building, but no place for elected officials to bring their children for childcare or an exercise room. So it's reflective in the way we run our own government, is how young people are reacting to what's going on in the state. It's very reflective of what is going on in our own State House. I think that encompasses a lot of what we need to work on. So affordable childcare, health care, and housing. But it's not just good enough to say that anymore. We actually have to take steps and have practical solutions to do that. So with housing, no one wants to talk about gentrification, but you need responsible development, but it also has to be partnered with wage growth as well. Across the country, we're seeing wage stagnation, and it's just remaining the same while costs of living are going through the roof. I know that there's plenty of people that want their COLA. They want their cost of living adjustments. We need that adjustment in our budgets. We need to make sure that people are staying in the state because of great education in our school systems, in our university systems, because of our affordable housing, and because we have opportunities for young families. So I think we just need to make New Hampshire a better place for all families through and through, and I believe in my own position on the board of the New Hampshire Young Democrats, we have a lot of catching up to do experience-wise, that you guys bring so much wisdom to the State House, and we have to catch up a little bit. But what we're doing is we're taking these 996 bills, and we're going through, and we're cultivating our own ideas. We're bringing our own millennial policy agenda, and we're coming ready. And we're coming ready to fight for young people and to bring more diverse voices to the table. And I think that that's what we need in Concord, as you've all mentioned. We need to shake it up a little bit, and we need to see some change.
I think you're very right about many things there. As I walk with you in Ward 11, for instance, we are different generations. We're both in education, and we do share an awful lot of ideas, and I do find that as much as I value the experience and the expertise of my colleagues, I'm also energized by the youth and what the youth are bringing to the table for us. We have about 4.5 minutes or so, and just one quick topic that I'd like to throw to Steve, if I may.
Sure.
We're not done yet. Our session isn't done yet. Would you
We'll be
just
back.
let everybody know what's going on for us in the future?
Well, we'll be back on September 13th for veto session.
And what kind, we have 4 bills, I believe.
Yeah, one of the most important, while it'll be over in the Senate first, of course, is the death penalty, and hopefully the Senate will do the right thing and and overrule the governor's veto and send it to the House so we can do the same and pass it into law. I served in law enforcement for over 30 years, and I was always pro-death penalty because of that. And I talked to my parish priest about 6 years ago, and I said to him, Father, do you think anybody's ever executed who's innocent? And he looked at me like, hey, stupid, they executed our Lord, and, oh, yeah, I guess they did, you're right. But it made me stop and think, and the whole concept and how cruel and vicious. It's like a third world country, and that's one thing I hope that we can overrule. And the other one is we have 2 biomass bills, especially that are so important for so many reasons. First of all, it's renewable energy. It's New Hampshire's own grown energy. It's providing jobs, not just for the North Country. I understand Hillsborough was one of the biggest suppliers of paper and wood products last year. So it has an effect on the entire state's economy. And why the governor did what he did, I don't know. But I know a lot of Republicans are going to be coming across with us and voting to overrule that veto. And hopefully the Senate will do the same thing on those 2 biomass bills.
Excellent. Thank you for being here, Steve. I believe we're coming to the end, so I have 2 minutes. Quick statement from each of you as to what I should be looking for if I'm able to cast a vote for you. Tim?
I think the main thing to look for is responsibility and accountability. You know, I can say very confidently that in the time I've been in Concord, we, the Democrats, have been the fiscally responsible party, and, you know, we aren't going to let the Republicans have that. The policies that we advocate for are long-term fiscally responsible. We pay a little bit now to save a lot later. The gasoline tax that was passed back in my first term was an example. You know, we spend a little now to save a lot later, and I hope to continue to advocate for policies that are going to make sense for the long-term future of the state.
Ken? Thank you. Ken?
I hope the people will elect me because I think I'm a reasonable voice to speak for my constituents up in Concord, and that I have an interest in a specific area where I have some experience, but I'm also very opening to listen to other people's ideas in areas where I can't, and hope that I'll be successful in reflecting the will of the people in Ward 12 that elect me.
Thank you. Willis?
I hope the people of Ward 11 elect me because I'm a young voice, I'm a new voice, and I have good ideas and some new innovative approaches and a willingness to work both with our great leadership, great fellow candidates, and across the aisle as well to make New Hampshire the best place we can for all families.
Thank you, Tim Smith, running in Ward 10, Willis Griffith running in Ward 11, and Ken Snow running in Ward 12. I'm also running in District 45. I'll be on the ballot with each of these gentlemen. I think we have an incredible slate of people. I look forward to the coming election as an opportunity for us to bring our thoughts to the table and out to our constituents, and I look forward to seeing all of you in Concord, hopefully, in the coming, well, in December, I guess, is when we would start if that's the case. My name is Connie Van Houten. This is Ward 13. Thank you for joining us tonight. Next week, more from the West Side. Thank you and have a great day.